Hello everyone and welcome to another casual review. Today I'm talking about Warcraft III Reign of Chaos. I grew up playing this game so much and I'll get into some personal stories here. I just want to preface this casual review by saying I did not play the remastered version of this game as I do not own it. However, I've heard a lot of complaints about the remastered version for one reason or another, so it sounds like I'm not missing out too much by playing the original version that I grew up playing. While the cinematics on the original version still hold up great. Blizzard cinematics are always amazing. I went to YouTube and I would watch the remastered version of the cinematics when I got to the appropriate part in the campaign. And they don't change much. I think it's just like an HD uplift. I feel like they didn't actually like recreate these cinematics. It's just like more of an HD version of it. So even if you don't want to look up on YouTube and you just want to play the OG version and watch the OG cinematics, I would heartily recommend it. That being said, this casual review will be full of biases. I'm just going to preface that right now. I guess you could say all of my casual reviews have some amount of bias. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be watching my reviews because I input my own thoughts and ideas into these casual reviews. But I have a huge history with Warcraft. Whenever I talk about Warcraft nowadays, most people tend to start to think of the MMO World of Warcraft. And I did play a ton of World of Warcraft. I played up until the 4th or 5th expansion. It feels like such a long time now, but really it's only been maybe like 6 or 7 years since my last burst of World of Warcraft. Obviously, MMOs come with their own problems, mostly the time constraints required, but Warcraft 3 is a different game. Takes place in the world of Warcraft, not to be any more confusing than that, but it is a different genre. Warcraft 3 is an RTS, a real-time strategy game, but Warcraft 1, 2, and 3 were one of the few games that I actually remember playing with my dad. He doesn't play too many video games, but he was really into specifically Warcraft 1 and 2. I think he was done by Warcraft 3. So if you've never played Warcraft 1 or 2, I don't think those two have aged very well. They are very slow and clunky, but just for curiosity's sake, I really don't remember too much about Warcraft 1 or 2. I was just a young lad at the time, but I remember like the big deal about Warcraft 2 was they added aircrafts and water and like boats. But Warcraft 3, the big thing that they introduced was heroes. But I remember playing Warcraft 3 all of the time. Let me paint a picture for you. My grandparents were quite well off, and I had an uncle, and he was the youngest of that generation, and so he was a lot closer to myself and my brother's age than most of his own siblings, so he was really more of like an older cousin. And any time we would visit my grandparents' house, he still lived there, and he had this he basically like moved into this dance studio, and the dance studio is just this big room that's just flat concrete and a wall full of mirrors specifically for dancing, but he converted this to a LAN gaming room. LAN stands for local area network, and that means like you don't need internet and you're connecting computers to other computers directly. And so back in the day, whenever you wanted to play like Warcraft or Diablo, those are the two bigs I did, but Command and Conquer, that's another big one. You would play with each other using LAN, so you'd bring over your own computers and stuff. But he had maybe like 4 or 5 of these computers set up, all hooked up with Warcraft 3. That was our main go-to. So anytime we'd go over to the grandparents' house, we knew we were gaming downstairs in the dance studio. Usually he'd put on like a movie or some music, and we were just obsessed with Warcraft 3. Now, I was younger in this age group. Obviously, there were like younger cousins here and older uncles who would also play older cousins. So I was more on the younger side, but I would often get a chance to play even though I got my butt kicked all of the time. Even when I was feeling like super confident, I had just played through the campaign or whatever, I'd practice a lot on my own. Anytime I'd play with my cousins or my uncles, I would get absolutely destroyed. And so I was a big advocate for playing on teams. Now, Warcraft 3 we also introduced the cool thing about Warcraft 3 is it has its own game world maker. Basically, like, you can make your own maps, you can design your own rules, make your own games, really creative. And I love to just make my own little campaign story modes, because my favorite chapters in the campaign of Warcraft 3 were the ones where it completely does away with the town building. You got your hero, a couple sidekicks, and then you kind of do more of a dungeon crawler kind of thing, like a Diablo maybe. And so I would always make my own little campaigns with that. It was really cool. But one of the game modes that came up from this game maker was a game called Dota. And Dota is a genre that has developed called a MOBA. All of this started with Dota. I know it's a lot of acronyms. And so if you've ever heard of League of Legends, is the biggest one I think now, Heroes of something, Heroes of the Storm, that's another big one. And so these are all genres of MOBAs that started out with the OG Dota, which was a game mode that was created from Warcraft 3. So we would always play either Warcraft 3, like the intended town building combat kind of thing, or we would also play a ton of Dota. And Dota I was even worse at than Warcraft 3. But those are my biggest memories of Warcraft 3, is just gaming down in my uncle's basement, just playing a ton with a ton of other people, which is, I think, is how this is meant to be played. But I also was quite infatuated on my own with the campaign, and I loved the characters and the lore that came into fruition from this campaign. A lot of these characters are still big through the MMO World of Warcraft. I mean, really, I might even go as far to say that Warcraft started my love for medieval fantasy that I have today. Okay, let's talk about the actual game itself now that I've gone on my nostalgic trip. Warcraft 3, at least the original version, is very polygonal. Obviously, it doesn't look it's not really much of a looker by today's standard. I think I'm looking through this game through nostalgic glasses, however, because I still think it holds up. Obviously, the cinematics are awesome, but yeah, looking at it from like a more unbiased point of view, they do look quite polygonal. It's not too big of a deal because your camera is zoomed out and these characters are so small that they're tiny. But when you have like these in-game cinematics, that's what I'll call them, and you get like the close-up vision of the characters and the models, yeah, they can look quite polygonal, but that doesn't really bug me too much. Even the voice acting in this, I think, could be a little cringy by today's standard, but I have such a nostalgia for the voice actors of, like, Arthas that I am completely willing to look past that as well. The basic plot of the campaign of this game is it starts out with an invasion of undead. And basically how this campaign works is you play through as the humans, and then you learn how to play through as the undead, and then the orcs, and then the night elves. And so I think that it does a good job introducing these factions and how you play them and how their town building works and how their heroes work and all that. It introduces this stuff slowly to you, so by the end of the campaign, you should be fairly familiar with all 4 of these different factions. And that's why I recommend, before even attempting multiplayer, I would definitely recommend playing through the campaign, because it gives each of the units and buildings and heroes a quick little spotlight, maybe a little tip on how to use these characters, so then you can accurately judge how to play yourself. But the undead, going back to the plot, the undead invasion is starting, and you're playing as humans, and then the undead invasion gets too big, and so we have to go to a different continent, and we're playing as, like, then you actually get to play as the undead, and you get to be the bad guys for a campaign, and you're just invading Lordaeron. That's this whole human continent. And then you play as the orcs, which escape to go to the different continent, and then you play as the night elves, which they're kind of the natives to this new continent. And we find out that the undead invasion is basically to prepare for the Burning Legion. So the Burning Legion is basically like a bunch of demons from a different world, and there's the biggest demon of them all named Archimonde. And Archimonde's basically trying to destroy the world, and so it's up to a mysterious prophet that we're introduced pretty early into the game, and he's basically trying to unite the humans, the orcs, and the night elves all together to stop this Burning Legion invasion. I just grow attached to all of the characters and the heroes, like Thrall, so cool, and Jaina, Malfurion. How could I forget Arthas? These hero characters are so influential and they ring so true in my mind. While I don't feel like they didn't get much like character development really, because you only get to play a couple, like maybe 7, 8, or 9 levels with these heroes, I do feel a personal connection to them, and that could obviously be my bias speaking, but I think that they did a good job with the world building and setting up the threat and really building up the big bad Burning Legion as well. There's an overall theme of being corrupted by power. I feel like every faction story in this campaign had some kind of need to get more powerful, but by doing so you lose a little part of yourself. Obviously the biggest one would be Arthas, but then you have like Grom Hellscream. Another memorable one would be Illidan, who took up the demonic power to stop the demons himself. So a big theme about corruption and power there. So let's talk about the gameplay itself. Usually, actually all 4 factions have some kind of peon. These are like your workers that build stuff, and you're going to harvest gold with them, gather lumber. You're going to gather those 2 resources to build buildings, and then these buildings you can use to create fighters and upgrade those fighters for the I'm oversimplifying this, and each faction has their own little quirks to them that you'd have to pick up, but you would build these units. These kind of games are kind of twofold. If you've ever played like Age of Empires, kind of similar to that, where you have the base building aspect and then the combat aspect of it, and you need to be able to multi-manage both at the same time. And you can also play as heroes, and I've talked about the heroes. The heroes are quite overpowered. They can level up through experience, so there's a little bit of RPG-ness to this, especially in the campaign, because your heroes will level up throughout playing their campaign up to level 10, and every time they level up you can either invest in a brand new skill or upgrade a skill. And growing up, I remember, I'm just looking back at how I used to play, and it's such like a 11-year-old kind of thing to do, but I would always invest in like the flashy spells for my hero. It was all about the heroes. And whenever I would play multiplayer, I built all 3 heroes right away, and I give them like the cool spells that look really cool. And now when I'm playing, I've learned that maybe it's laziness having to click through and use all the different spells, because not only do your heroes have spells, but usually your other minor fighting units have 1 or 2 different spells that you can utilize as well. So I found the benefit this playthrough, maybe the last playthrough too, of investing in their passive abilities, because some of them are really good. Like all the units around your hero get a bunch of armor or 30% extra ranged attack. So investing in those passive skills that you're not actively using is also really smart, because they don't take up any mana and you don't have to constantly be using them. And so that's just one difference between how I used to play these campaigns and how I play now. Another one is you really want to be building up a fighting party and exploring the map while you're upgrading your base and adding buildings and things like that. You want to be able to multitask and bounce between both. And how I used to play the campaign when I was younger is I wanted to just hunker down and defend in case, because the enemies would send like a couple waves of bad guys at you, but I would just hunker down and I wouldn't explore, and I'd upgrade every possible thing that I could. And finally, when I have a whole team of maybe like 20 different guys, then I would go out and explore. And you can imagine how long the campaign would take when I did that. Each chapter would take upwards of maybe an hour, because I would just hunker down and upgrade everything, and I didn't want to explore. But now I am able to bounce between the 2 easily, so I would gather up a hero and maybe like 2 guys and go off and fight some, they're called creeps. These are just like wild people in the woods, or monsters that you would go fight, but they're not exactly controlled by your opponent that you're playing against. So I would go fight those guys and gather up gold and search for more gold mines and do a lot more exploring while I'm bouncing back to the town and micromanaging that, checking that all the resources are being gathered. I'm upgrading things constantly, and I felt like each chapter on average would be about 20 to 30 minutes. So it really cut my campaign time in half. That's how I would play in multiplayer as well, and that's probably a big reason on why I was always losing, is because it's really important to fight a bunch of creeps out in the wild to upgrade your hero, to get them to level up, to get those abilities, because by the end of the match, when I'm playing against actual real people, their heroes would be like at least level 6 or 7, and I'd be starting out at level 1. So I felt like that might be a big reason why I lost. I still think that the online community, as far as I understand, is still very big, even for this original version. It still has quite the following, and I would absolutely get destroyed if I ever got online. There were a couple times back in my tweens and my teens when I would try to play online, and I just always lost, and people would trash talk me, but I was so in love with the game that I just wanted to practice, and I wanted to get really good and beat my cousins and my uncle. But I don't think that will ever happen. Even today, I feel like even if they haven't played for a decade now, if I challenge them to a round of Warcraft 3, they probably still would destroy me. It's very humbling, and that's why I really enjoy just playing the campaign of this game, because the campaign isn't difficult by any means. Like, sure, sometimes at the worst, your base will get a couple buildings destroyed when they attack your base, but I'd never lost. Even when I was 11 years old, I never lost a chapter of this campaign. So they're very lenient. I think there are difficult settings if you wanted a little more difficulty in the campaign, but I'm not sure how much that does affect it. I just know playing on normal mode, it's enough to keep you engaged, but not stressed out, which I really enjoy and appreciate. Another thing that separates the boys from the men is the ability to utilize hotkeys to your best, because time is of the essence. So using these hotkeys, like creating groups using the Control 1 and the Control 2 so you can quickly bounce between them, or using hotkeys for the abilities. Or if you double click on a unit, then you'll select all the units around it. Or, there's just like a lot of different tips and tricks and hotkeys and setting rally points to your heroes, and a lot of different tactics that I feel like the campaign doesn't do a very good job explaining, but these are things that I just learned from playing with other real players. And once you really master the rally points and the hotkeys, I think you'll be a lot better off with your time management. Another thing that I like when I play these campaigns are there's just like a lot of secrets and a lot of things that you can explore when you're playing. Like sometimes you'll come across a friendly NPC and he'll give you a side quest to go get like a cool item. Oh, heroes can have up to 6 items, which affect your stats in various ways, but I always like to get the orbs on my heroes, because every time you get an orb, you get like a spinning blue or red or yellow thing around the hero's weapon, so I always thought that looked really cool. I think one of the orbs makes your hero ranged, which is nice because not all heroes are ranged, so you can't hit flying units unless you have like a specific orb. I can't remember which one it was, but I would always go for the orbs because I thought they made my character look even cooler. Movement can get a little clunky. The path that is computed for some of the characters is a little wonky. It's not unusual for your characters to get in the way of each other, and then they try to like move around, but the guy who's in the way starts moving over too. It's like that thing where you're in a hallway and you come across someone walking the other end and you keep moving into the same direction trying to get out of each other's way. And so I felt like the pathways could have been a little more thought out. Maybe they fixed that in the remaster, I'm not sure. I also understand the benefit of using buffs and debuffs this playthrough a lot more than previous playthroughs back when I was a tween and teen. Those all seemed boring to me. You couldn't see those. But now I realize stats like rejuvenation or roar, things that increase your attack power, are really beneficial. Compared to back when I was just a dumb kid and I wouldn't care about that stuff, like all those different passive things. Really, I didn't really worry about like any of the minor units that you would build. I would only worry about the skills of the heroes and not the characters that you could build. And that's why I think that That's another reason why I probably got my butt handed to me, is I didn't use all the buffs and debuffs and abilities to my advantage, only the heroes, and then only like the really cool flashy spells. One of my favorite things to do though is the undead can build a character called a Banshee. And the coolest thing about the Banshee is that they can possess a unit, and then you just have main control of that unit. And it's not like a temporary thing, it's forever. So one of my favorite things to do, and I never really pull this off in a game against real humans, but whenever I'm playing against a computer, I'll use a Banshee and I'll go possess their little worker guy. And so if I'm playing undead, I would possess like their human worker, and the human worker can then start building a base for you. So by the end of the match, this would be like a 2-3 hour match that just for fun. But then I'd have like this whole undead army, but then because I possess a human worker, I could build this whole human base as well. So then I got a mixture of both. I think at one point, just for fun, I put like 3 of the computers on easy, and then I possessed all of their workers. So by the end of the match, I had control of like all 4 different factions at the same time. I had a lot of time on my hands, I'm realizing. Overall, I really do love Warcraft 3, and for those of you who don't know, Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos is more like part 1 of Warcraft 3. And then there's a part 2 called Warcraft III: The Frozen Throne. And this is basically the same thing, but the plot develops from here. Our heroes get more fleshed out, and this sets up the basic world of Warcraft lore. So I'm excited to eventually get to the Frozen Throne as well. I feel like I've played Reign of Chaos campaign a lot more than Frozen Throne, because I always felt like I needed to play them in order, and then maybe halfway through Reign of Chaos I would move on to a different game or something. So I'm really familiar specifically with the first part of Reign of Chaos, but I have played through Frozen Throne campaign 2 or 3 times at this point, so I'm really excited to jump back in and get reintroduced to, I think her name's Medivh. I like that the Frozen Throne starts with the Night Elves, because the Night Elves always were the faction that was kind of mysterious to me as a younger kid, because that was like the last faction you got introduced to, and I usually didn't get to that point before I got petered out and moved on to a different game. If you can't tell, this game means a whole lot to me. I'll always get nostalgic when I hear the music or I see the graphics, and I'll always think of those times that I had some LAN parties playing with my relatives. It's a bygone era, for sure. I don't think I could ever really set something up to that degree again, but I just loved the memories that I had playing this game. I will give this game a 5 out of 5. Super cool. If you're at all curious about Warcraft lore, I definitely recommend starting with Warcraft 3. I don't think you need to play Warcraft 1 or 2, but play Warcraft 3. There's a lot to get introduced to, all these different heroes and world building. Definitely start with Warcraft 3. It's a cool game, especially if RTSs are your thing. I think you'll have a lot of fun playing this. Well guys, that's it for me. Let me know if you have any questions or comments about Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. Otherwise, I'll talk to you later. Bye!